Oh, here we are, July. Another MacAdmin Monthly in the month of July. And I probably every year say, July, this year's flying by. I don't know. It's just a thing to say. Do I really think it's flying by? Hmm, I don't know. How does it feel for everyone else?
It is crazy. The year is half over, right? I mean, all the things we wanted to do, and some of them we may have done, but yeah, there's so much still
Yeah,
to do.
yeah. Well, anyway, here we are, July, summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And we're this month joined by the lovely Armin Briegel. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, and it's so great to be back.
Yeah, and it's an interesting time. We just had WDC, which with a bunch of announcements, and now we have three revs of the Sonoma beta to kind of feel our way into. So far, I'm feeling pretty good about it. I think it's been pretty stable. Like all my stuff runs. Like I kind of YOLO'd it onto a work machine, and everything's good so far.
That's great to hear. I haven't dared put it on my work machine yet, but
Well, I
but
always have a backup. It's not it's my daily driver, but if things went south, I have another machine I can work with.
but with all the cloud connected syncs and whatever storage,
Mm,
is it really
yep,
separate from your work machine?
that's a great point. It's always questionable, and wow, little weirdo echo with that, huh?
Oh,
Um, oh, I heard a weirdo echo on this side. Anyway, you're right. What is going on? If you're not hearing that echo, I'm just going to turn this way down so I can hear you, and maybe I won't hear myself echo through. Um, Technology. But yeah, Apple had that problem a few years ago with iCloud, and right, it erased a bunch of files. So people might have loaded the beta onto one machine, but then it came along and nuked their personal iCloud stuff, which isn't great. I'm not signed into iCloud or any personal services, so for me, if things went off the rails, then I wouldn't be destroying my personal stuff.
yeah, but then again, if you're not logged into iCloud, are you really testing macOS in the new incarnation fully?
Um, I am in my work situation because no
Okay.
one's signed into iCloud or a lot of those services. Like we have our blessed service is G Suite. That's it. So happy, happy.
Yeah, I have tested with Sonoma, and so far my testing is going well, but I have not yet dared to move to the my production machine to Sonoma. I usually wait until after the summer vacation, and that's when I move to the beta. Then I go all in. So yeah, that's usually around 5 or 6, beta 5 or 6, end of August.
I'm going to take a second and just adjust my audio configuration because everything is echoing and it's nuts and I don't know why.
Might be because you're on the beta.
Adjust my audio configuration. All right, there we go. I think I'm safe. Okay, no echoes. I wonder if I'm just running something somewhere because this is I do this on my studio Mac, and I don't know, maybe I have some delay plugged in somewhere. Anyway, I think I'm safe. Um, yeah, so let's talk about that. What are you excited about in Sonoma?
Well, they are trying to bring widgets back for the how manyth time? I mean, I think actually from what I've been playing around with, this time it might actually work. I mean, we like customizing our iPhone home screens, and I think everybody has played around with that and probably settled on something right now. I certainly have. And yeah, so if we can do the same thing on our desktops now, maybe that's going to stick.
Yeah, I agree. It is interesting that I think there's all this stuff that showed up on the Mac first and a long time ago, and all those things but didn't really gain traction until iOS did them, and sort of people became aware of them and thought like, oh, right, yeah, I'm interested in this now. I think widgets are a perfect example of that, where people have gotten used to them on iOS. They know what they are on iOS. So now they kind of understand why they would want them on their Macs. But you probably remember way back Confabulator, right? It was a way to run widgets on your desktop, and it was great. And then there was another one, I can't remember the name. And then Apple kind of brought, that kind of view to us. But yeah, it's
and
a
they
good
were
point.
written. I do want to point that out. They were HTML widgets with JavaScript, and there was an app called Dashcode to build them, which I actually really loved. I didn't love
Yes.
writing in JavaScript, but the app was really cool to design your own things, and it worked really well.
Yes.
I think there have
Agreed.
been a dedicated WWDC session just for that,
Yes.
if I recall correctly.
Well, they used to have dedicated WWDC sessions for a lot of things that we might miss these days.
So I know you are. Oh, actually, let's get something else out of the way. Sometimes I end up syncing up with people here because they're releasing a new application or they're doing something, very timely or whatever. But you're still writing and selling books, or at least selling your books on Terminal and some of these other topics, right?
I am still writing them too, I have to admit, but I haven't had the chance or the opportunity to actually finish one recently, so there's nothing new. I mean, the books that I have are still out there on the Apple Bookstore to buy, and I update them. And, as we've said, macOS went through some really big changes, like in the Catalina Big Sur time. And since then, it's not like it has stood still, but the changes haven't been quite so disruptive. So even the books I haven't updated in a while, it's not that I'm not looking at them. It's like I don't need to update them because things really haven't changed that much.
Right.
I'm looking at some books and saying, yeah, well, you know what? I probably need to rewrite that. But I'm also, since the last time we spoke 2 years ago, I have started working as a consulting engineer for Jamf.
Hey.
Which is a great job, wonderful team. I love working with my close team, who are wonderful people, and the wider company. But yeah, that eats into the writing books time, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah. But anyway, while we're talking about that, tell people what's out there so they can go support you and buy that.
Yeah, so the two books that I heartily recommend is either if you have experience with the terminal already, but have always been wondering what this Z shell thing is that Apple has set as the default shell and how it really is different from Bash, you should get my book Moving to Z Shell, which assumes you already know terminal, but explains what the Z shell is and how it's different from Bash and why you should probably use the Z shell on macOS, or when you shouldn't use it, because there's also good reasons. If you're new to the terminal on macOS, and those books are pretty much complementary, but if you're new to the terminal, I have Terminal and Shell, which explains what the difference is between the terminal and a shell, and how you can use both of them, and dedicated to macOS, because there's lots of primers out there for how to use Bash and Z shell on Linux, and those get you pretty far on macOS, but then you will run into the differences. And this book is dedicated to macOS.
I used Bash for so long. And I knew people even before Apple made the switch. There were people like, oh no, ZSH, you got to check it out. It's so much better. And I never really did. And then Apple kind of forced our hands. And I thought, well, I should at least check it out. And it was almost a no-op, right? It's very similar. There are a few sort of little gotchas maybe that you have to learn and watch out for. But overall, it was kind of a no-op. But I definitely know people that are like yeah, I'm still installing the latest Bash, and I'm using Bash, that's fine. I think it's fine. Like, we wouldn't make fun of people if they were using fish shell or some other, shell that's still updated because they preferred it. All right, fine.
I mean, we are 4 years since Apple switched the default shell, because that was in 2019. That was the last year we met in Gothenburg, and
Yes. Wow.
so we're 4 years into that, and Bash 3.2 is still on macOS, which
Well, yeah, that's why people are either installing from source or homebrew or something and getting Bash 5 or whatever the latest
yeah,
Bash
but
is.
many people are, but many people aren't, and they might be using Z shell for the interactive shell, which is nice because, especially for
Yeah.
the interactive shell, not much difference in the initial way you use it. But they might still be writing their code against Bash, so they put the Bash shebang in their scripts. And I mean, as long as the Bash binary still stays there in bin bash on macOS, that'll work fine. But I think you have to be aware of what you're actually doing there. And even if you install Bash 5 through Homebrew, or you compile it yourself, or whatever means you use, if you don't switch the shebang in your scripts, you're using the Bash 3. And
Yeah, agreed.
yeah,
Agreed.
I
It's
mean,
going to take a long time for Bash to disappear. Hopefully, people writing installers and things like that go against SH, but we'll see. I don't know. I try to write my batch apps and installers using bin sh.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's the best recommendation you can do. But then again, bin sh on macOS is, even up to
Yeah.
this day, interpreted by Bash 3.
Right.
And when that ever goes away, it will suddenly be interpreted by something else, and that will change the behavior of your scripts.
Yeah.
And
I'm not sure it'll ever go away. I'm not sure it
yeah,
can. Like,
yeah. If you thought that Apple removing Python last year was a big disruption, uh, them removing Bash will be so much worse.
yeah. And given I think we think of Mac OS as sort of like very modern and new compared to a lot of other things, but it's quite old actually at this point, and there's still so much written in Perl. There's still so much Perl on the system. Like, yeah, we got rid of Python. I don't know when they're getting rid of Perl. I don't think they can.
I'm sure someone is working on it. I mean, it took them also 2 or 3 years to remove all the tools that were actually Python underneath.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
somebody is probably chipping away on all those pieces of Perl that are underneath. It should be interesting to watch that.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess we'll see. And then there's AppleScript. So I don't know.
Well, I also remember talking about Gothenburg, that Sal was there a few years back, and he said that AppleScript and the open scripting architecture is so deep in the operating system
Yeah.
that he doesn't believe Apple will ever be able to get rid of it on macOS.
Yep.
So I'm
Yep.
hoping he's right. And
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's a
perhaps-
difference between AppleScript as an interface and then sort of like Apple objects, right? And it's sort of like passing those things around.
yeah,
So
Yeah.
I don't know. You're right. We'll see. I'm going to break away from this for a moment because in the chat, we have a message from Emily who says, as the manager of the team that manages Armin's Mac, I appreciate the don't install betas on production message. Yeah, I can partially agree with that, but I also think it's really important to have sort of a healthy beta program within a company. I think that's
I think
really
the
important.
keyword is healthy here, right?
Yes.
And not just
Yeah, yeah.
people willy-nilly installing things. But I mean, especially at a company like Jamf, I'm sure there are people who are barging ahead in all kinds of ways, which is probably not a healthy way of doing it. but it also exposes challenges very quickly.
Yeah.
If that's a good
Yeah.
thing, I don't know.
Yeah, I've tried to. Okay, so Emily's going to correct me and say we have a robust group of testers, which is
I'm not one of them. I am not one of.
which is
Not that I'm complaining.
spot on. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Like, I think the reason it's sort of top of mind for me is like I've been struggling to get people to join a hey, will you please be on the beta, and not even Sonoma yet, just even like the current OS beta.
Yeah.
Like I want people testing 13.5 because we've gotten bit before by there was this weirdo change and like man, if we were only testing this, we would have found out, right? And like we would have caused pain for a handful of people versus like, oh, you told us to upgrade, right? Like we're nudging people to upgrade and then they go upgrade. It's like, you're causing problems for us. So, yeah, let's see. Most people have multiple testing devices as well. They test on capital letters. Test devices, not production devices, which, yeah, is also something like I partially agree with and partially feel like you really need to be using a thing as your daily driver to really put it through its paces. But yeah, I could see like a hey, this is a lab machine only maybe for the first round, and then the next round when you feel the waters are a little safe, or at least what the issues might be. Maybe then move it to a daily driver. I don't know. But again, every company's different. Its tolerance for pain is a little different. I just like the idea of trying to catch those things because, like I said, I've been burned before, and it's like, man, if we had some people on the beta track, we would have called this out.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, I'm going to put my consultant hat on now because Apple doesn't give us time to not be on the betas anymore. I'm not sure
with RSRs.
We're on the permanent beta track, right?
Well,
I mean, as
yes.
soon as Apple releases, and I don't just mean 14.0 in the fall, but 14.1, 14.2, they're permanently in beta, and Apple will release them. And because of security, because of CVE fixes, there's so many pressure to be like, okay, maybe you can defer for a week or two to see if there's any bad things like just happened with the RSR yesterday. But
right. Well, we'll get to that. And
yeah.
Also just super quick, I'm gonna finish up. Emily's been typing away. And to be fair to Emily, she said they can enroll test devices in our production environment to test. We also have a testing rubric. So you guys are super advanced. You're living in the future. That's like fantastic. I love hearing that. I find I'm fighting sometimes really just for the foundations. Like, let's get the foundations in place for some of this stuff, and a robust testing program, like all the things Emily just mentioned. That's where I'm ultimately trying to get to. But right now, just please, I just want to get a few people to agree to be on the beta. But yeah, let's get back to RSRs, because
Yes.
I agree with you. We are kind of living in this permanent beta where Apple will make a fairly impactful change from time to time on what we consider a point release, right? It's not a major OS, but you come along and something like changed out from under you and you're like, what the heck just happened? You kind of go look into things and you're like, why would they change this behavior in a point release? It drives me bonkers. But now we have RSRs that you can't even test in advance, right? Like, that's a little frustrating, maybe, right? Like, you can't test these RSRs in advance, and for good reason. I get it. You don't want to put this thing out there that lets people reverse what this patch is and go, aha, now we have this 0 day. Like, that's the whole point of RSRs. But as we saw yesterday, they put out this RSR and like, whoops, and then they pull it. So the early adopters were the beta testers, effectively.
Well, I think, one of the things that Apple said is the point of RSRs is they're rapid security releases, so they bypass some of the internal testing. And then yesterday we saw what happens when they bypass the internal testing, and there might be voices that say, you know, Apple's internal testing isn't the most thorough anyway. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a bit disappointing because I think it's an interesting technology. It's a promising technology, a great idea.
Well, I think the other frustrating thing with RSRs currently, we'll see where we get to in the future, is like when they were first announced, it was kind of like, oh, and you won't have to reboot. Oh, that sounds fantastic. But every RSR that has come out, you've needed to restart or take some major action. And like, I just got everyone to install 13.4.1. And now this RSR comes out and you can't really force it or nudge people yet. So you're at like, hey, go do this thing. And you're gonna have to reboot. And given the beta cycle, I fully expect 13.5 to drop next week. I'm hoping, right? So what am I going to do now? Right. So now what are we going to do? Come along again and like, oh, hey, everybody, emergency install this thing. So, yeah, I think with RSRs, I'm following the path of a lot of people and just whatever. We'll come along in 13.5 and we'll just roll it up because I think people just get fatigue of just always being told like, oh my God, go patch this thing. And it's a disruption to you. Obviously, if you can come along and patch something in the background no one knows, great. I think there's probably some value to setting the automatically install updates flag on your machines. And hopefully there's a portion of them that they just leave them on overnight and magic happens and they wake up and it's rebooted and they have this patch installed. Great. But it's if you can't do that, it's just it's patching fatigue for people, I think.
Yeah. And even though like with this broken RSR, you can remove it again, which is a big step forward. But guess what? Removing it requires another reboot.
Yeah. But that's better than being dead in the water if it was that bad. Or I think the complaint with this particular RSR is that it fixed a CVE in WebKit, which drives web browsing, and then some people started saying like, oh, I have some sites that won't load at all. So like, if it's destroying your productivity, sure thing, remove it and get on with your life,
Yeah. I mean, it changed the user agent in Safari, and it changed it in a way that many websites would not recognize the user agent anymore because, user agents are this weird lineage of where the browsers came from. And a few years back, Apple actually stopped changing the user agent. So no matter which Mac version you're on, it will report it as being Catalina.
And I believe Chrome did the same thing at some point. They just said, like, our user agent's not going to tell you specifically, where we are.
Yeah. And this one changed the syntax of the user agent in a way that suddenly the server would not say, I don't know this browser. I'm not certain what to do with it. So that was the problem. And that's something that, if it had been thoroughly tested, I'm sure that would have been caught. But it's a rapid security response. Now, I really don't want to diss the people at Apple here because this is complex and complicated. And I'm sure it's a severe thing that they fixed. It's a 0 day. So that's important.
Yeah, I think overall, like that's a great point. Overall, I think Apple is doing really great work on the security front. Overall, it's still better than anything else I've dealt with, whether that's Linux or Windows or whatever else, in terms of like just patching and getting patched. So yeah, you're right. I think they have a great security team. They know what they're doing. They're trying to advance the state of all this. And I think that's why I said with RSRs, like, we'll see where we get to eventually. Like, I would love to really see like, oh, you can install this RSR and it comes along in the background and you don't have to restart. And you don't even know this was a big deal, right? It just came along and did the thing. I remember years ago, like when Chrome it's like a year or two after they first launched, they had this, too clever by half system where they would come along in the background and just patch the core of Chrome. So as you opened up new tabs, the new tabs would be running with the new version of Chrome, and old tabs would still point to the old version. It just got too bonkers, and even they kind of gave up on that type of like let's just patch without having to restart. And of course, most people just keep 6,000 tabs open all the time.
You might have tabs running in Chrome versions that are 4 versions old.
Right.
You never close any tab.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think the big thing I wanted to talk to you about is, I know from your talks and talking to you, like you're a big fan and proponent of Swift, and using Swift as a, sort of like, maybe not a Python replacement, but, as a scripting language, as a programming language. Are you seeing anything in Sonoma, or like, I know the Swift language just got sort of like this huge bump. Anything for admins that's useful on that front?
So I haven't dug very deep into the new things in Sonoma, because one of the downsides of Swift is it is Apple or the Swift org, which technically isn't Apple, but it's very much influenced by Apple. They update Swift very frequently. We get 2 updates every year. But since when you write anything in Swift, you rarely have the luxury, and then especially as admins, we don't have the luxury of it runs on the latest version only. We probably want to support N-1 or N-2. So we are all this new goodness in Swift and Swift UI, we are 1 or 2 years behind. We can't use it.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know.
Which is great, because we still get new stuff every year. It's just the new stuff that was introduced at WWDC 1 or 2 years ago. It's still new for me because I haven't been able to use it yet. So I'm looking forward to dropping Big Sur or maybe even Monterey support for some things, and then using the things that were introduced last year at WWDC, which will be great.
Are you talking about things that you might need to write for clients?
Well, yes. So the tooling, the reason I am excited about Swift, and the reason that for the past year it's always been something on the side. Of course, there's day-to-day job, and shell scripting is the main automation tool for any admin still. Whether you use Bash or SH or Z shell is a minor detail there. But then Python was yanked out of the system, and I can install my own Python, and there's the great work with the MacAdmin's Python that gives me a very easy pre-packaged Python that I can install when I need to, and that's great. But it's an extra dependency that I have to install and manage and keep up to date and make sure my tooling works with that particular version. So that's extra work. And so with Swift tooling, I don't have necessarily that dependency, but of course I'm creating an app or a binary that I have to install and run on the machine. But in some ways that might be easier than managing Python, because using Python is nice,
you
but
either have to ship
Python is an extra challenge.
Yeah, you either have to ship a script or a binary. Yeah. Like you're shipping something to the machine. So if you're using Swift, ship the binary, be done with it. Don't think about it.
Yeah. And also we've seen over the past years, as Apple is tightening these security requirements, that, for example, to be approved through privacy controls or the TCC, all these things, my scripts or binaries have to be signed.
Yeah.
And I can sign a script and deploy it on the Mac, but then things get really fishy. And if I have a launch daemon that runs a shell script, the question of who's the parent process that needs to be approved in PPPC gets really complicated very quickly.
Yeah.
And that is something that I don't see going away. I see that getting more and more restrictive. And that's where shipping your own application bundle or binary will be what Apple says, this is what you should do, this is the supported way. I think I don't want to be all doom and gloom, and we had that a few years back where everybody was scared that launch daemons were going away and things like that. And I don't want to say that's the future. I really hope that's not going to be the future, and I don't think it's going to be. But we saw last year in Ventura, Apple introduced a new way of managing login items, with
Yes.
which they meant mostly launch agents, actually, not launch daemons, but launch agents. And you can now bundle a launch agent in an app bundle, which is great because I don't need to do some other fancy stuff to get my launch agent on the system in the right place. It's in the app bundle, which is nice. And I can launch and install the launch agent from within my code in the app bundle. And Apple said they're going to deprecate other ways of having a launch agent. Um, they haven't said anything about launch daemons yet, but I can see it sometime in the future. I can bundle a launch daemon in the app bundle as well. And whether that's good or bad, we will have to see for the details. But yeah, at some point, we will just have to be building apps. And yes, you can
Yeah.
build apps in Python, you can build apps in AppleScript if you want to, but Swift is the default language from Apple's perspective. And if you're starting out building apps, and that's what makes it attractive for me in particular, and I think for other Mac admins as well, Swift, especially now with Swift UI, is a very approachable language.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
The get everything into a bundle is very iOS like,
Yeah.
isn't it? Whereas, it all stays together. The end user, like, I don't want this thing anymore. You drag one thing to the trash and like it all goes away, kind of, right? Like, that's useful. I like that. That's good. So speaking of Swift and talking about the work that you're doing now with Jamf, I have kind of a segue to get there, but something that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, over time, I think you've heard me speak about this over time, is like the changing role of the sysadmin over time. Like if you go way back in time, the sysadmin was everything, right? Like, I bought this new server. I'm going to get it set up. I'm going to add users. I manage the disk space, probably do some networking and all the things. And then, things start to get more complex. And now someone comes along and they're like, well, I'm a database administrator, right? So you can manage the server. I'm going to manage the database. And I understand how to, set page sizes and queries and stored procedures and optimize the speed of this database. And then companies grew in size and like, oh, well, we need someone to handle networking full time and routers and switches and all the things, right? So the sysadmin kind of got removed from that, and there's a dedicated networking group, and the responsibilities of a sysadmin kind of became more and more specific. And I think over the last 8-10 years, we're kind of seeing another shift or sort of schism in what a sysadmin does, and it's mostly because of like DevOps type work. And that's, the people, I guess like me, I'll put myself into this category, like the people that care very deeply about an OS and managing that OS for end users, and like, I'm gonna learn all your secrets, whether that's Windows or Linux or Mac. It's a slightly different person than the platform engineer that like, I want to manage this fleet, but I'm building the back-end services that those machines check into and I'm configuring whatever backends, and I'm writing Terraform, and I'm doing all those things. It's not exactly the same person as the person who cares like deeply about the OS. And it is interesting because I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and like who cares about the OS level question? And I don't mean it as like, well, who cares? But I mean, who's the right group to care about that? And I'm not sure. It probably depends on the company. But I'm thinking more and more like it's almost an extension of help desk. I think that like these people should really deeply care about all the secrets of the OS and getting this stuff to run correctly for end users. And that can potentially be a tough position because help desk obviously still needs to do all the break and fix stuff and help I can't print and whatever else. But like to give that group a path for growth, it would be really nice to give them, to use a Google phrase, like 20% time to do project-based work where they really deeply understand the OS. And getting back to the beta program we were talking about earlier, like, yeah, they should be able to sort of identify like, hey, I'm running the new beta and this thing broke. Oh, well, let's go figure out where that is. Because I don't think the platform engineers, the DevOps people who are architecting all this other stuff, I don't think they care. And that's not bad. It's not wrong. It's just, I just don't think they care or need to care about the real deep down details of an OS. Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. I think I agree that there's this kind of sort of split. There's the back end of the server, of the management server, and all the other tooling that we use. But you can also be DevOps on the client, on the OS. I mean, there's tooling we can build and we have to build. I mean, look at tools like Swift Dialog from Bart Reardon or Outset, which Bart Reardon again rebuilt. But there's also great work in like Dan Snelson built the Set Up Your Mac, which is this beautiful automation script. And then, of course, Nudge and Super and all of these tools that are there, not to talk about Monkey and Auto Package, which are all in different levels, this DevOpsy approach. But yes, these are people who, as you say, care about the OS. They're on the clients.
Yeah. Yeah, but still it's a client focused things. No one's writing Terraform for repeatable deploys to these things, right? It's like it's not a back end system that these machines are checking in with. Yeah, I don't know how to classify that, but it is something very sort of like endpoint based. And we have Apple Share IT, someone calling themselves Apple Share IT in the comments saying it's all about user experience, end user experience. Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know if it's the DevOpsy platform people who like are launching services and have to learn about Kubernetes and like all the stuff surrounding that. Those people probably don't care about like, hey, Apple said this thing about the next version of the OS. They don't care.
Yeah. I do find it interesting that when you talk with developers and developers always have the perception of themselves of knowing the OS very deeply. And I'm sure they do, and they probably know aspects of the OS that I have no idea of. But there's also this huge area that we as admins and probably because everybody of us goes through these years of support and help desk. And even once we leave the direct, I'm not on the phone anymore, or nowadays maybe chat and ticketing system, doing nothing else, but we still get drawn into these support cases on this is broken, fix it now.
Right.
And from that, we learn the OS in a different way, very deeply.
Yeah.
That even iOS developers, macOS developers who know about app writing and all of that stuff very deeply, they don't understand that.
Yep. 100%.
And of course, I don't understand what they do, so that's fair, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There are these like two paths of like going deep on the OS. And I think developers like they learn all the frameworks and APIs and things. And then there's like the admins who get really deep in a different way. And I know from, social media, I follow a bunch of Mac developers, and every now and then someone says like, hey, I just learned that if you go touch vardb.apple setup done, like it, the machine acts like it. And I know that's a bad example because it's gone now. But like for years, you would see developers saying things kind of like that as an admin, you're like, yeah, right? Like, yeah, of course. Like there's a thing we use all the time. Like it's not a secret, but it was to them. So like, we all have different pockets of knowledge and ignorance to each other's sort of respective worlds. I know it's getting late for you. I don't want to hold you up too much, but I did want to sort of use Swift and talking about APIs and building backend services and things, just to quickly talk about your work with Swift and administering Jamf and using the Jamf API.
Yeah, so I did a bit of a stupid or naive thing last year. There's the Jamf Nation user conference in the fall, where and as it is with these big conferences, you have to put in your topic months in advance, 6, 7, 8 months in advance. So Jamf Nation user conference is in September, so there's WWDC in between. You have to figure out something that's interesting, that will interest myself for the next 6 or 7 months, and will still be interesting in the fall, and will probably not be disrupted by the developers conference. So last year, I put in the topic on how to use the Jamf API with a Swift app or Swift UI app, because I thought, that's evergreen. There might be changes for that in developers conference, but they won't be too big. And the other thing that I always try to look for, and I know that Tim Sutton said this a few years ago in one of his conference presentations, that has stuck with me ever since, is I want to present on something that I want to learn myself. Because it'll give me a deadline, it'll give me a project, I will have to do it, otherwise I'll just push it ahead of me. And that was something like, use the Jamf API, and Jamf API is talking with JSON, so replace it with every API. I want to do that from Swift, and how do I do that? And the JNUC presentations are 30 minutes, which is not a lot of time if you want to talk about Swift and JSON and everything. So I had to compress it down, and I thought, well, this is really short, and I'm just skimming over the surface in 30 minutes. Wouldn't it be great if I wrote a series of articles? And I actually suggested that to our Jamf marketing, and they said, that's an awesome idea. Let's do that. We'll put it on the Jamf blog. And yes, so it's like 30,000 words, 6 articles. I finished it last month, so it took me more than half a year after JNUC. But there's a series of articles on the Jamf blog. I have a post on my website that summarizes all of them and links to all of the 6 individual articles. So you can easily find them. That really starts from scratch, and we build a command line tool that talks with the Jamf API, and then we build a Swift UI app, and look at all the pieces and how it works. And I learned so much writing that. It was a lot of fun. It was also a lot of work. And yeah, I hope, because talking with APIs is what we do, right? I mean, you talk about being the client engineer, the client person, but then we have to talk with those backend services, and that we do that through APIs in various forms. So
Yep.
that was something that I put together, and that's tooling. I mean, we all use curl to call APIs from shell scripts, and it works, but it's really nasty, especially if you then start parsing JSON with awk or something like that. And
do you think you learned more on the Swift side or the Jamf API side?
for this one, it was definitely more on the Swift side, but it was close.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Jamf API certainly has some. It's grown over the years and has some complexity because of that, which are very interesting. But no, for me, and again, for me, app development and all this Swift development is relatively new for myself. And I think that's a path that, for the reasons I said earlier, Apple is pushing us towards app bundles and everything as the unit of code, as the unit of automation. I think that's something that not everybody will need to do, but the people who design and build the tools, as you said earlier, the people who care about the OS, who build the tools for Mac admins, we will be pushed into that direction, or
Yeah.
are being pushed actively.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. I think we've all kind of said that for a little bit, but
Yeah, it's not a new development, but it's getting more and more. It's accumulating.
it's getting more important. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Particularly, again, if you need to sort of differentiate yourself or bring more to the table, like it's really important.
Yeah.
Great. Well, again, I know it's getting late for you. Thank you for joining us at sort of a late hour. Where are we going to see you next? Conferences or back in person? What do we have? Penn State, is that this week or next week or something?
Next week, I believe. This
Next week.
Starts on the
Somebody in the
18th,
chat will know.
and
I'm not.
19th, and the 20th is the conference days. Next week, Tuesday to Friday, I think.
Fantastic. So, since you didn't know the dates, I presume you're not going to Penn State.
No, I will not be attending, and that is one conference that I haven't attended. Or I've attended it and spoken there virtually during the pandemic, but not in person. So maybe 1 year. I will also not be going to JNUC this year because 2 weeks after JNUC is Gothenburg, and I didn't want to have two conferences in short sequence. So I will be in Gothenburg at Mac sysadmin. And I'm really looking forward to that because that is always such a fun conference with great speakers and great attendees. And it'll be great to see everybody again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. That is the conference that I am putting all my energy into getting to. So I will see you there. Great. And, speaking of virtually, or, sort of like virtually participating in these conferences, I know we just had a bunch of conferences, MacAduck and Mac DevOps YVR, and I think they just got their videos out. So if you're looking for material, there's plenty of MacAdmin material to go through. So you should look for those. But thanks as always. Can't wait to see you in person. And
thanks for having me. And until Gothenburg, until October.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again, and I'll see everybody in person very soon.
Bye.
Bye.